Hi, Chris. So,
Hello,
great
how are
to
we
see you
doing?
again. Same, very good, thank you. So, Chris, we were talking about our meeting last few weeks through the Agentics Foundation activities. Tell us a little bit more about what you have, how you have found it, and perhaps I would love to hear a little bit more about what your inspiration has been to get involved and what you are doing more so. Over to you.
Yeah, so I think it probably slowly happened over a couple of months. Is that I've been working on a lot of what you call agentic engineering with my coding and come up with a whole kind of bunch of methods really through trial and error in terms of what seemed to be working. And while I kind of felt very isolated, like I was the only person I knew kind of working on these things, doing these things, very slowly over time, LinkedIn kind of started showing me some posts where it's like, oh, that makes sense, or that's very similar to what I'm doing, and that kind of thing. And I started to notice this thread that nearly all these people were people who are involved in the Agentics Foundation. So that's really what brought me kind of to it. At some point, the kind of penny dropped, and I was like, actually, there's this group of people here who are doing very similar things to me. And while I didn't know a lot about it, and I'm still very, very new, I kind of realized that this was actually the place that I needed to be.
So Agentics is a talk of the town. Almost every conference, every session we go, people are talking about Agentics, though with varied levels of understanding. Some very introductory, some, I guess, like yourselves, who have actually done something about it. So I was reading some stats today this morning. Obviously, global Agentics is, some of to understand the scale would be to understand that probably a market greater than 100 billion is developing by 2030 from what exists as like 5 billion or so in on a global scale, right? 50% of companies are considering adoption in some respect. You know, the impact has had like code generation tooling on programmers. I mean, apparently stats say people are 126% faster already in terms of how they progress with creating new stuff. And obviously, not to say your space, which is automation, I'm presuming, workflows and automation, like the impact that it could have in terms of making things better and simpler. Suggestions suggest is 15 to 50% very quickly, improve automation and, I guess, enrichment of experiences. So, lots of numbers floating about. But what's been your motivation in terms of what are you trying to do? What changes are you trying to provide for? Tell us a little bit more about Augmented OS.
Hmm. Well, I mean, I've been working on software probably for the last 7 years or so. Um, Certainly at the start of that time, I was very much focused on kind of founder mode and kind of directing product and having a team of technical people to build things out. But it's really hard to manage what you don't understand. So I found myself being kind of drawn more and more into the technical detail. And at some point, this new model came out from OpenAI called Codex. Now, that's not to be confused with the new
A new
system
one.
which just came out, which we will no doubt be talking about later on. But this was, pre GPT 3.5. So by today's standards, it was a very incapable model. But the fact it was specialized towards coding, it could actually do some quite useful things. Very quickly made me realize that this was going to have a really significant impact on software development. And although this was an extremely early signal, it became clear that at some point in time, whether it was 5 or 20 years' time, code was going to become commoditized because these things were actually they were okay at producing very simple lines of code, but this was only ever going to get better. And it was only a matter of time and if and when these LLMs became better than humans, if you like, at creating code. So at that point, I kind of put a halt on everything that I was building SaaS-wise and really went all in on just understanding how to get the best out of the current AI. Because I figured that if we didn't know what we were going to be building to make money in 5 years' time, what we did know is the capabilities which we'd be using. And so for me, I've predominantly been focusing on capabilities of products and services.
And what are these capabilities that you see are going to become more and more relevant? I mean, how would you, if you were to abstract it, what would you say capabilities would be? That would be quite essential for businesses or what would be commonplace.
I mean, I guess it may differ for every person depending on your abilities, but as a founder or as someone technical or a builder or a creator, I think it kind of comes down to three things really. So first is a capability to learn, because a lot of things are going to be changing very quickly, and the ability to cut through the noise and understand what's going on is going to be a real critical thing moving forward. The second is the ability to build, because it's no good learning things if you can't actually deploy them as value in the real world. So I don't necessarily mean build software, although if you can, that's a fantastic output. Building tools is probably the more valuable thing. So one of the things I say to a lot of people is stop thinking about buying in your tools and start thinking about building your tools. Because in 5 years' time, the idea of buying in your tools is going to be very foreign, because your tools are your competitive edge. The third area really is selling. Yeah. And the reason that that's really important is because if AI, as we believe it will, kind of commoditizes most businesses, then selling in a commoditized market is very well understood. All you need to do is go down your local fruit and veg market to understand how a commoditized market works, right? Everyone has the same product. But here's the thing, it's not the person with the best stand in the best position or the best salespeople or the best products that actually sells the most. It's the stand who has the best relationships with their customer, because you go down and you listen to the conversations, and someone will come along, it'll be like, oh, how's Betty getting on, did she pass that exam, has Dan done his driving test yet, oh, it's next week, well, wish him best luck. Yeah, it's these interpersonal relationships which actually make it to the point where these customers would feel almost like they're cheating by going to the stand next door, even if it had better products, even if it was selling it at a better price, because they buy based on that relationship. Yeah. And we might not know exactly what we're going to be selling in a few years' time, but we probably know the kind of people that we're going to be selling it to. Therefore, by building a community around what we want to do and how we're doing it, we're kind of building that ability to sell, in the nicest sense of the word, whatever it might be that we're going to be selling.
I mean, that's fascinating. In fact, what you have just said probably echoes very well with, the point about commoditization and the new way of interaction, which is what the evolving space of AI seems to be taking us towards, is what Satyan Nadella, for example, said is AI agents will become the primary way we interact with computers in the future, right? They will be able to understand our needs and preferences, kind of proactively help us with the tasks and decision making. And I mean, that is the what and the how. I guess what you are highlighting is how, if this is the norm, then the differentiation comes from the ability of a community, right? I mean, a community that allows a set of values and ethics to be embedded with that way of working and kind of keeps I guess we're looking for more localization rather than globalization, probably, because every culture, every society is different. And I guess it also could lead us to a situation where you have the differentiation within society, the empowerment of the society, creating unique experiences society. People are not constrained by centralized systems. I mean, I meant to ask you about the build versus buy topic a little bit later, but you touched upon that. I guess it allows niches in society to be more easily manifested within this new internet of AI, I guess. What do you think about that? Does that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a guy called Daniel Priestley who's quite prolific in the UK, and he had this concept many years ago of I think it was called like was it global small businesses? What was it called? It's called a global brand.
Daniel Priestley, right? He also look up.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So really, what the concept behind it was that like you can actually be a kind of a global brand in a really specific niche if you're a kind of small business and you focus hard enough on your kind of ideal customer profile, right? So his idea was that in the future we'd have lots of kind of brand leaders, but for incredibly specific things. So, you know, I help, you know, conveyancing solicitors who work on commercial projects between £1 and £5 million who are struggling with X, for instance.
This is a very valid point. I mean, I'll relate to a conversation I had with the CEO of a SME in the insurance sector. And we were talking about AI and we were talking about software that they are using. And there are 2,000 brokers in the UK, 2,000 insurance brokers. That's a number. Of these 2,000 brokers, 1,900 are small brokers. Remaining, they make revenues of just over 1 million, is in profit pay revenue, but they sell insurance like up to 5 to 5.5 million. That's the risk they sell, right?
Mhm.
But they all use the same system, a system called, let me not name it, but it's quite a big system. And that system sells for like 25 grand to 50 grand of license per year. Now, this is an amazing software. And the thing is that they don't even have APIs because they have so much monopolized the market. They don't need to open up API. So far, been protected from competition. But they're like, okay, but you know what? 40%, 50% of my staff's time goes into unproductive activities because chasing invoices, pursuing, we have, for example, they have some 20, I can't remember the exact number, but X thousand customers who are kind of repeat customers, but they can't maintain warm connections with them because it's just too much work. So
Mhm.
they're like, we pay all of this, but this particular centralized product, we probably use only 30% of its features.
Mhm.
But now we have an option. Now we can actually, why don't we create something niche for our kind of small insurers? So we are very different from the AIGs of the world, right? They may need all of those features. We don't. And maybe, and I showed him some stuff about automation, using some of the automation tooling. And I'm like, yeah, we would love to build something like this, right? So I think your point about Daniel Priestley and the whole niche offering of particular, I guess, capabilities is, it was always desirable for it to be. So you reduce your costs, you be more productive, but I think it's much more doable now. It's more feasible now, right? With the way technology is going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, let's face it, that's probably a middle ground onto something else because we all know at some point, again, the outcome is known, the timeline isn't. But at some point, you'll just be able to point an AI and go, build me HubSpot, but I want this, this, and this, and I prefer this to be like that. And you're going to have a perfect bespoke business which like fits exactly around how your business works. And if you ever want to change the way it works, and you just say, hey, do it like this instead, then it kind of changes. That's the pathway that we're on. And the opportunity in the meantime is going to be, well, we're not there yet, right? But what you can do is build a hyper, specialized solution. So for instance, HubSpot for insurance providers, for instance. And if you can build something which has the features of HubSpot, but it's hyper specialized to their particular vertical, then the likelihood is it's going to create a lot of value.
Absolutely. So let us then use this opportunity to understand a bit about what your focus is currently with Augmented OS. Tell us a little bit more about the magic you're doing there.
So, I mean, Augmented OS is something which really came out of this 7 years of software development that I've been talking about. And when I kind of realized that going all in on one SaaS probably wasn't the way to go, considering the AI trend, I started building custom solutions for businesses so that I could really understand what bespoke system looked like. The other aspect to it was that, I mean, kind of agile methodology tells us that if you want the perfect pot, you don't spend a year building one pot, you build 100 pots and your 100th pot is going to be lovely. So I figured the more small projects that I did, the quicker I would learn and the better I would get rather than trying to kind of go all in on one massive SaaS product. But what I very quickly learned from that was that most businesses needed the same platform. Yeah, and it was actually way simpler than it would seem on the surface because actually, like 90% of the difficulty with patching these different fast tools together is just data. Yeah. What happens is if you build a single source of truth for a business in terms of having a centralized database, then actually everything becomes very easy because you're not having to move data around from here to here to here to here, which is probably where a good chunk of that 40% of time of those insurance businesses that you were talking about was going. It's like, oh, is it in HubSpot? No, I think it's in the Gmail. Well, let's check Slack just in case. No, I remember now it's over in a Google Doc. Right? Everyone's time is wasted doing these things. But as soon as you have one system, which is your single source of truth, then everything becomes very easy. And when you do need to automate it, it's actually quite simple. And it actually got to the point building these kind of custom systems for people where I was like, well, look, I have a very good idea what the underlying architecture looks like this for something which would work for everyone. And it's probably quicker now to go out and build that architecture than it is to do another bespoke project from scratch. And that's really where Augmented OS came from. But having then had a big project to work on, which was never the original intention, I then went, okay, this is a lot of scope. How do I need to do it? And that's where I kind of started stepping up my use of AI agents in the coding process, and where I started to develop out some quite powerful methodologies of my own around it.
So obviously, you felt need for simplification of how data is organized and consumed, and therefore more leveraged, I guess, to perform business outcomes, right? Um, Now you've highlighted that you've used AI agents. Can you tell us a little bit more about like how AI agents come into play here? What kind of problems they are helping simplify beyond obviously beyond obviously kind of probably making things much more accessible and simpler. So is there something that you might want to talk a little bit more or show us perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, so there's been a trend line over time in terms of how AI can help you as a coder, right? And one of the reasons I decided to get a lot more technical a few years ago was because I realized that of all the people in the world who benefit from AI, developers are going to be top of the list because, they use programming languages and large language models are very good at that. So I saw something the other day which really reminded me of how far we've come because it was on my Loom account and I'd sent someone a video about 15 months ago. And I was really excited because I'd been working on quite, by my standards anyway, it was quite a complex kind of Python script, which I was working on.
Okay.
And the autocomplete in VSC at the time, and I was using it, had accurately kind of predicted the next, say, 20 lines of text, which I was about to do. And at the time, it absolutely seemed like magic because it's kind of pulled in the patterns from the way you're building the scripts elsewhere in your code base. It's kind of interpreted and understood the variables you have in that particular script and probably inferred exactly what you're going to do next. And it's able to pull that together and go, hey, here's your next few lines of code. And I found that really incredible at the time. And yet you compared that to where we are today, where, I mean, yeah, as a comparison, I keep getting told lines of code is not a good metric. And I agree. I just don't have a better one. But to compare that with, I think it was 2 weeks ago now, I did a kind of feature build out and I was kind of tracking my process at the same time. And I wrote about, well, it was 7,200 lines of code in a day. And every line of that was AI. Now, I had a lot of framework around that. And I would say that every line was as good quality as if I'd written it myself. But like that is the leap forward that we've been through, going from, hey, look, this can auto predict 20 lines to with very heavy guidance and validation, it can generate thousands and thousands and thousands of production ready lines of code a day.
Okay, that's very good. So, in terms of your vision for the future, what are the personas that you are aiming for? I mean, I'm interested more so who is your target? Now, I had a quick look at the product. I mean, it is a
Mhm.
great workflow orchestration tool, right? I think you have simplified the way people can apply logic, use human in the loop in between. So there is not really uncontrolled. There are guardrails to operate, but who do you see as the key personas that would benefit from it? And if you feel free to show us a quick demo if you would like to show visual aspects of it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, if I can, I think there's a lot of parallels between what I'm building for small businesses and the way that we go about agentic coding. So I think probably the best place to start here is on the agentic coding side of stuff, because much as I mentioned, hey, you can do, 7,000 lines of code in a day using agentic coding. That's not something which really happens out of the box. You need to put some pretty heavy frameworks around it, as you'd be sure to know. And Cursor, which I predominantly use nowadays, is great, but it can go off in all kinds of directions if you're not very careful with it. And if you want to be quick in terms of delivering high quality and efficient code, then for me, a large chunk of your time goes into thinking as much about your tooling and how you use it as actually the work which you need to do. Yeah. So I think one critical point in the development of agents was when Cursor expanded out from just having a Cursor rules file to having project rules. Because what that allowed us to do was really expand on the amount of guidance which we could give the agents. And that really, for me, formed the kind of foundation of the framework which I use now. And I guess the way I describe it is kind of a natural language framework for guiding agentic agents. And really, the power of that is that if you've got all your behavior described in natural language, then it doesn't matter what new agent comes along. It will be able to interpret that, and it will be able to work within those guidelines, even if it's a brand new out of the box, amazing agent with higher capabilities. So as an example, Codex came out less than 24 hours ago now, just over, I think. I've already given it some pretty heavy usage, and out of the box, I'm able to use my framework like immediately in order to really heavily guide exactly what it's doing and how it works, and with absolute kind of minimal tweaks, really. So I mean, I'm a visual learner. I find it much easier to kind of think about how things work when I'm looking at them. So, and I also love using kind of Claude to create quick visualizations. So here's one I made earlier, as they say. And really, when we're thinking about guiding agent behavior, then I think it breaks down into like two things, really. It's like what we want it to do, which is the task, if you like, and how we want it to do it. Yeah. And actually, like, both of these things are equally important, but they're solved in very different ways. And so for the what we want it to do, I've kind of created this task schema, if you like, in YAML. Now, I was trying desperately to find frameworks which would do a great job of this, and I tried a whole bunch of things, including Taskmaster. I found with that is that a lot of them use JSON schemas, right? And like, I mean, I'm a geek. I love JSON as much as the next coder. It's amazing, but it's also not very human readable. And I just find that, like, having worked in projects where you have both JSON and YAML, like, it's so nice when you're switching to the YAML side of it, because you can just look at it and see, and it's so readable. And I think one of the most important parts of it, the agentic engineering, if you like, is being able to have that kind of to and fro. It's where they're really limited at the moment. You seem to have this spectrum where it's either like, okay, go away and do this, so I have no input, or actually I need to sit there guiding every step to make sure it's correct. Right? My vision with this all along has been to absolutely streamline the process so that you're still able to make the important decisions, yeah, and have the oversight of all of the engineering, but without having to get tied up in the detail or do the repetitive yes, 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 yes type thing. So I guess if we dive a little bit into the kind of details.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
And I would love to actually also visualize how it is probably slightly different from some of the other frameworks like Spark, which I have been using based on my learnings from Roof in the Agentics Foundation. So it will be very interesting to understand what the differences are as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Spark looks like a great framework. I haven't had a chance to play with it too much yet. I guess while it is kind of full process framework, I believe, like my focus has been predominantly on task execution. And the reason I say that is because with Augmented OS, I went through a very big kind of architectural phase where I worked out all of what I wanted to do and how and what the microservices would look like and what endpoints they'd have, because I figured the best way to build it out in the way that I wanted was by actually solidifying my kind of architectural choices and documentation. And whatever I did, it would then be much easier to get the AI to do what I wanted. And if I wanted to verify, it would be much easier because you can just say, hey, compare it with the architectural docs. Has it stuck to what we actually want it to do here? Yeah, so that for me was a relatively solved problem because, using templates, using things like PRDs or architectural documents, I was able to get a fairly clear blueprint of this is what I wanted to build. Where I started to struggle was then using Cursor Agent to build it, because first of all, it would go off on weird tangents where you'd ask it to do something and it starts doing it. And then it goes, oh, while I'm doing this, I should do that. And you're like, no, 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 stop, don't do that. Or it would start doing a task and it would do it without really understanding what your patterns are in your code base or how a function was used in the other files for context. And that's really how a lot of this kind of came about. So really, if you're using Cursor, you can think of this as like a rule system to use, right? So Cursor rules broke into kind of 4 different areas, really. So the first is like behaviors, and that's things that we always want Cursor agent to do, right? It's kind of like an always on, right? So I've got my kind of repo up here, which is open source, so we can kind of jump into some of the details. But if we have a look at what some of the behaviors might be, then we've got our preferences in terms of like how we want it to behave, like being concise and comprehensive. Then we've got other things which are super important as well, like sticking to the code conventions that we're using. And that could be everything from file and folder structure to how we're using like file name casing and how that should be used. Because again, I'm sure we've always seen how inconsistent agents can be if we don't specifically tell us this is what the file name should be, this is what folder you should use, this is the style which you should use in your code. But then critically, we added another type of behavior, and that is actions. And the thing with actions is that these are more like workflows, right? These are things that we want them to do, and when they do them, we always want to follow a certain sequence or a certain set of rules. So, for instance, if we're debugging, then we don't want it to write any code, right? What we do want it to do is load as much files as possible in everything which might be relevant in order to improve its understanding of the situation, and then look at all of that together in order to try and extrapolate where the issue might be. Yeah. So by then kind of creating these different actions, we can now have a lot more fine control over the agent in specific situations, right? So if I take executing a task, for example, because we're going to look at that in a lot more detail kind of shortly, then we could give it some quite detailed instructions on exactly how you need to pass this YAML file, right? So you can tell it, and this will make more sense shortly, but it's like when we pass context into the task, it's like, you have to read this file. Do not do anything until you've actually loaded up this file in its entirety and you understand what it does. And we can tell it, for instance, that we need to verify the acceptance criteria. You can't be lazy. If it says we need to run a test at the end of the task, you need to run that task, or you need to run that test. So again, what we're doing is we're building out a library of different actions, and some of these most people like you might use, but actually you might have specific actions and ways that you want your agent to behave. And that's super easy because you just create a new action in here. You tell it exactly what workflow or process you want it to follow or what rules you might be. And then you tell it within the action selection, hey, if you need to do this, then load this rule. Because Cursor has different types of rules.
I see this. So there are loads of parallels, is what I'm saying. The bits about actions and like coding, basically the coding rules, right? The debugging rules, the specification writer rules, the referencing rules, like what documents, the architectural design documents. I think there are loads of parallels. I think we would love when you explore Cursor, and I think we could also inculcate some of what you are shown, because there's a very detailed aspects in some of these rules actually, which are probably project specific, and but I do get that, and I do see the power of it. And I do something similar. What I have done personally, I've actually used Spark because Spark has been designed mainly for Roo code, right, on Visual Studio. I found a way of translating those rules into a Cursor rules. Basically, I asked Cursor. I first set Spark up in Cursor. Then I asked Cursor to create a Cursor rules files based on those rules, and I would put some UX rules. And the key thing is test-driven development. So anything that is being built is feature by feature, right? On a completely test-driven development basis. I think, which is what I think similar. We will probably use something very similar on what I'm hearing from you, and I think that helps. I mean, it is probably Cursor is nowhere as close automated as Roo code could be. But I guess that may be a good thing for different personas, like, people who are really advanced may want to be completely automated, right? In terms of full build. The other thing quite interesting noting is what Chris Noyle has been working on in terms of signals. He's created this, AI. He's been using Gemini quite widely. From what I understand, he's been capturing the logs of everything the AI is doing and using that as a context window to make sure that it stays on track in terms of what it does. So it cross-references and semantically improves its understanding of where it is at a point in time, and therefore always is corrected back or feedback loop operates to get it towards its ultimate objective. So Frenoid, it starts with a free. It's a very long name that Chris has given to that, but it's very interesting. You may have seen it probably. He's been sharing a lot on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I have, and there's a lot of uses for the kind of ultra high context windows, if you like, getting up to 1 million. And it really does unlock a whole load of kind of new things. We're predominantly talking about task execution here, but for instance, for feature planning and task creation, I mean, you've got more than enough tokens to actually pass your entire code base into Gemini Pro and say, hey, look and understand how I'm doing at the moment. I want you to create a new set of tasks for this feature. Make sure you follow all of these rules. And again, this is kind of the beauty of having like a unified behavioral instructions, if you like, because in the same way that Cursor follows these rules, you pass the entire code base into Gemini and Gemini will follow these rules. And as I said earlier, passing your project into Codex, where it has access to your entire repository, that will also follow the rules as well. So you're kind of getting this unified behavior kind of through to, for instance, where you have, and we'll come more onto the tasks shortly, but where we have like a task schema and YAML for like, here's how you create the tasks. You don't need to re-explain how it works to Gemini. You can just say, create tasks from this repo based on the task schema. And it will create those compliant with the YAML format and kind of everything else. So
help me,
it's very kind of universal.
Educate me on this task YAML. Help me understand what it is, what is its role in the overall framework. How does it
Yes.
really add value? What's the differentiation?
So probably the easiest thing to do is kind of look at an example of a task, right? And the reason that, like I said, this came about is because quite often the agent just doesn't do what you want it to do. And so you want to control that behavior as much as possible. But the second thing is that, there is a big difference between vibe coding and agentic engineering, right? Because with vibe coding, you're just going, here's the output I want. I don't care how we get there. With agentic engineering, you say, here's the output I want, and it needs to be compliant with all of my existing engineering standards, and it needs to be high quality code. And that's a completely different paradigm. So there are probably different ways of doing it. The best way that I've found in order to make sure that agents generate code according to the code quality and taste which you have is to actually pull forward those engineering decisions. Yeah, so by having a plan which says, I want to do this by using this library, I want to change this function, I want to do this, I want to do that. And of course, we're not writing these plans manually, we're using AI to write those plans. But by using the AI to do it, we can then review, make changes as necessarily, and then when we're happy, we can head into what is now essentially the automated part, which is like, here's our line books, go and execute them all. Yeah. So what you'll see here is, for instance, we were talking earlier about the importance of context, right? These are the context files which you need to load before performing this task, right? You have to load them into context. You have to look at them, understand them before you do everything else. Yeah. Then, for instance, we've got different steps in the workflow, and these are targets. So it means these are the files they're going to be updating, and we've got instructions around it. And it's very useful to have
This
constraints as well.
kind of relates to what our friends at Creo AI keep talking about. Give an agent a role, a goal, and the tools, right? The way I'm superficially interpreting this information is that I guess in a workflow, you might have an agent stand up to do certain things. Type of agent, perhaps you can determine, you want this type of agent, and this is the kind of actions you can perform. So this is, to achieve your goal. And perhaps these are the tools like that designer canvas.txs program and say it's a tool. You're kind of putting the guardrails in place for the agent to kind of be shaped up. And I'm thinking here, like, this might also mean that you could create new agents. I mean, the system might eventually even self-learn to create a new agent to an end customer's or end user's needs, as long as it knows what is overall available in the universe of tasks that the code base could perform and the tools it has. Am I getting the wrong end of the stick here, or is that is that something that is possible from what you are showcasing here?
Well, I think it comes down to nuance. And like much as we talk about kind of agents, there's so many different definitions and ways of kind of interpreting it. If we think about the way that we're using this in coding, right, generally it's going, and there's different ways of creating agents, right? We can create our own agents for specific tasks, or you have generalized agents, right? Generalized agents like Cursor, yeah, or root code, you can specialize a little bit, but really all you're doing is passing different prompts into a generalized agent. Or you have, OpenAI Codex, again, another generalized agent. Now, the alternative to that is building your own graph agents. And, there's still a lot of strong arguments for that. And that's certainly an approach I'm looking at doing through my own platform. But while we're working with generalized agents, we need a way to really guide their behavior very closely, because they already have access to all the tools. They already have access to all the repository. They can do anything. So really what they want is the guidance to kind of go ahead and do this. And of course, the benefit we get from working with generalized agents under extreme guidance like this is that when a new model comes out, we're able to get the best out of its capabilities straight away. right? So, it's no different to just saying like, hey, we have an engineer and, we want them to hit the ground running. What's everything that they would need to be able to do this task really quickly to a high quality, right? Because in essence, a lot of this is in natural language, right?
Understood. On this note, you touched upon the platform. Is your platform in a state that you can show, like all of this code, like how does it translate to something real for an end user?
Yeah. Well, so let's have a look at this kind of task format then, right, to see how it works. Because if you're familiar with because agent, then you'll probably recognize this here, right? So this was me executing a task. And what we see is that the agent very closely follows the task based on obviously what we've told it, but because we've also given it behavior instructions saying how to execute the task, right? So what we'll see is the first thing that it does when it loads the task is it actually checks the dependencies. So it goes, well, have these been done? Yeah. Am I actually okay to do this? Because if not, I'm going to stop, right? And while this was a different task up here that I was executing, I kind of captured a screenshot of it because I'd moved some stuff around. I'd kind of forgotten that I'd kind of changed the way we were going to do some tasks further down the line. So basically replanned. And the agent took one look at it and went, I can't actually do this task now because one of the dependencies hasn't been completed yet. Yeah. So it was very good at instruction following, even to the point where it just refused to do the task because it's like, no, the dependency's not done. I can't do it. Wait until that's done first. Right. So then
Okay.
if we see how it's interpreting this YAML, you'll see, so the first thing it's done is actually load this rule, which is execute task, because we've told it within our kind of behavior actions, whenever you execute a task, here's the rules that you need to follow, right? And we said that, we've got detailed instructions on what to do. Then from our agent, we can see that it read the files that we told it to in the order that we told it to, right? It's read the code, it's read the docs, which we told it to. Then it starts to actually execute the code in the way that we told it to. And again, it's reading around first, it's going to go and execute. So basically, by doing it this way, it's no longer like the agent's going off and doing whatever it thinks. It's essentially following our plan. And our plan is pre-planned to make sure that it's got the highest chance of success. It's following our code taste. It's following how things are implemented in the rest of the code base. And actually, it's going to be really high quality code, which comes out the other side.
So what do you think is the role of a software engineer going to be? Or what is it shaping up to be?
I think it's that magic word taste. Yeah. So from what I've seen, AI is very good at understanding different implementation methods. In a lot of cases, it's very good recommending the best technical approach. What it's not very good is understanding the bigger picture context and then making those decisions and recommendations in the same way that a senior engineer would be. So while I would say that I probably go with about 80% of AI architectural recommendations, the other 20% would be not necessarily a car crash for the project, but it'd be like, you just run into technical debt fairly quickly because you'd realize, oh, but we're doing this thing over here and it hasn't taken that into account. Well, actually, we've already got a pattern over here and it's going to be a lot easier to maintain if we kind of keep following it. So from an engineering point of view, I think the analogy that I use is like a conductor, right? We don't even necessarily need to be able to play the instruments ourselves anymore, right? I mean, like I would be pretty hopeless, to be honest, if I tried to sit down and write TypeScript without like any kind of AI tools. But I'm pretty good at reading it. I'm pretty good at knowing what good code looks like and what bad code looks like. And I'm pretty good at researching how to make a decision and making a decision and telling AI how to correct the code in the way that I want, right? So I don't play the instrument, but I can conduct. And that's where, from an engineering perspective, I think we're going in the future. We'll be able to leverage more and more of the coding work, but we still need to maintain control. And that's why I think these frameworks allow us to be more and more productive without losing any of our control over the code quality.
So let me ask you a follow-on question on that. So obviously, when I did my engineering, I read about basically C, right? That was a book that was their course for software engineering. You had to learn that big book on C and write code and all. And that's how we build some games, and that's how you learn the journey of software engineering as a junior software engineer many years ago. And I obviously lost touch, moved away from it. That's been the journey, and then you learn, and then you gather, and you make mistakes, and you become a senior engineer. Now, obviously, there are lots of senior engineers. Like for senior engineers, AI is an amazing boon, right? I mean, productivity is increased. What do you think? What is your advice, and what are your thoughts for people who have studied computer science, have been aspiring to kind of be in a technical line, but obviously they find the dynamics have shifted significantly? What's your advice to them? And the second part of the question is that what do you think is the impact on universities? Like, how should software engineering be taught going forward for the next generation?
Well, I guess I should add I don't have a computer science degree, so like everything that I know, I would love to say I taught myself, but I learned as I kind of needed to out of necessity, and very heavily leveraged AI in the last few years to upskill very rapidly. So the first part of the question is, what would you do now? And I think the answer is like building. Like, don't think about getting a job for someone else, because that pathway is probably disappearing. With more and more work being done of, say, junior engineer standard, there's much less requirements for hiring junior engineers. Yeah. So that's much less of a pathway than it used to be. And so you've got a double whammy. If you build your own stuff, you're going to upskill much quicker, and you're going to be able to potentially get a job more towards the kind of senior level. But second of all, you're going to learn how to create value in the real world, and actually that's much more important in the future, right? Because again, we know the outcome, we don't know the timeline. At some point, most engineering is going to be solved. What matters at that point is, what's the problem, what's your solution, and are people willing to pay money for it, and how do I reach those people? So it's back to the kind of entrepreneurial fundamentals, and those will be much higher long-term skills than being able to like edit binary and hex.
I mean, part of me also says like when basically you may have started learning about coding or software engineering, or when or at least when I did, I think a similar time probably, we would have learned with pseudocode, right? We would have learned about, this is how you think structurally, a problem, how you break that problem down, the logic part of it, right? Broadly speaking. And obviously architectural patterns, like what are the broad patterns, etc. That kind of broad understanding. However, progressively, I think as in the last 20 years or so, as technology moved, higher level languages have developed. People have focused more on learning the higher level languages like JavaScripts and others, learn the control syntax and everything. But I guess AI in a way is a boon because it is pushing people back to learn the fundamentals, like understand, like, if you have a problem, the tools are all there, but how do you structure a problem? Like your file here is a great example. Like how do you create a rule base? How do you think through the problem so then you can use it, as you said, to be entrepreneurial and create something new? I mean, part of me says that I think universities probably need to leverage these new frameworks that is coming out in the community and find a way of driving home that critical thinking skills in the younger generation, so they can think critically, they can look for a problem locally, and then actually synthesize the knowledge very quickly, use AI, solve it. And because that means from the very first day of their university, they are already working, they're solving problems, right? So it not we having to wait for 4 years, 3 years, and then apply for work. You learn by doing. Learn by doing. And I think that is the power that I probably is enabling all of us with at the moment. It's leveling the playing field. Moving on very quickly. Before we move on to, I think we've been speaking for a while now, which is I've been enjoying every moment of it. This, would you like to show us any of your end user product that you have with you? I have a couple of more questions for you, but I can wait for you to show kind of an actual demonstration, I guess, of a final end user product.
Yeah, for sure. Because again, we talked very briefly about Augmented OS before and how the concept is to kind of bring together the data, documents, and workflows into one system. And really, this came from as well a lot the engineering side of stuff, because as a developer, I realized it's kind of easy for us, right? We have an IDE, which is where nearly all of our work lives, right? So we're able to provide all the context we need to the AI to be helpful and useful in our work. So if we need to improve a function, it's very easy to pass that code into an AI. It's very easy to have it read it, understand it, and improve it under our guidance. And it's very easy to have it write back into our code base. Now, businesses are missing that loop, because unless you build very complicated scaffolds, it's actually quite hard to do a lot of manual clicking around through your Google Documents, for instance. It's quite hard to provide all of that context into the LLM in the first place. And then getting stuff back into your kind of documents, it's always copy and paste. And we know the tighter the loops, the better the quality, and that's it. If we have these massive loops where there's lots of manual stuff, then the chances are that most people aren't getting on board in the first place. So a lot of what we're doing is really around that. It's like, how can we bring everything together so that AI can actually be useful for business owners? And we said one of the concepts here, for instance, was data. So what we have built into our system is a data model editor for non-technical users, right? Because as a programmer, you can probably take a pretty good jump at what a Postgres schema might look like for a standard business. Yeah. And it's actually much simpler than you would have thought. The business domain of most businesses doesn't generally include more than 20, 25 different kind of entities, clients, invoices, transactions, those kind of things. It's not as complex as you would have thought. And you see a lot of the patterns again and again. So what that means is that it's relatively easy for us to build AI assistants, which can ask questions, iterate on its understanding of the business domain, and then actually build out a data model for Postgres, which can then become a single source of truth for the business. So, and if you see some funny stuff in here at the moment, it's because I just created like a custom demo for YC. So this was actually part of my demo here, where I've kind of just showing how it works. And we've got, companies, founders, even got a join table so that we can see, what company a founder's a member of, what equity percentage they have, and everything like this. Now, all of this is AI generated in essence, or we can do it manually through here because, I don't know if you've seen Copilot yet, but it's a very, very cool tool, which basically allows us to expose everything on the page to an LLM and kind of all of our hooks to it as well. So anything that we can do on the page manually, we can actually do with the AI assistant.
So this on your left-hand side, is that a Copilot? I have not explored it. So this is a Copilot kit, is it? And that can see your screen.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for instance, because it has access to kind of everything on your screen and your hooks. So for instance, if we were on the workflow view, then we could be asking questions about the workflow and it could highlight a particular step for us. Yeah. Or it could directly make changes to this workflow. So we could say to it, actually, after we execute the test, we want it to kind of do a double check to make sure it's fine or something like that. And it can then in real time use the hooks to kind of update the workflow. And we would see that kind of happen in front of us. So this is a bit of a messy example. If I take the nice pretty one, which I was using for YC, then it might be a little bit easier to kind of see what's going on. This was just a kind of term sheet checker, basically.
So how would you
Yeah,
interact here with it? So what would you say? Give me an example of what you can ask from Copilot.
Yeah, so this is admittedly kind of a mock-up of how we would be using it, right? But so we would be saying to it, right, we need to, like, we're going to kick this off using document ID. Cool, I've created a node for that, right? And we've now got an input for our workflow, which accepts a document ID, right? So then it's like, okay, we need to get the term sheet document from our document store. We need to retrieve information about what the standard terms are. So it's added these steps here. One is for the data store, which is getting back.
And how does it know which table to connect to? Like it looks like in tools like N8 and others, you drag and drop, and then you kind of click in and go into settings and you modify. I see what you are doing is you are having a conversation about, right, I have a problem to solve. I need to get the term sheets, right? You're asking it to add a, you are saying we need to fetch the actual term sheet document and also get our standard YC terms from a data store. So that is being interpreted to create a node there. But how does it do the settings part of it? Like where should it connect? Where should it pull? How does it know all of that?
Because it has all the context of the data model, basically. So it knows exactly what the data model is, what it looks like, and it can from there infer what the workflow needs to look like. So like all of these things, kind of context is king. We're essentially working with JSON schemas. So everything that you see here is JSON schemas. We call it a kind of a definition-driven architecture. Yeah, because what this means is by working with JSON, AI is very good at working with JSON, right? It's also validatable. So even in our front end, we can instantly kind of validate the JSON return from the agent. And if it's invalid, we can give it feedback and tell it to try again. And of course, we can have additional protections built on our kind of APIs to make sure that we don't accept invalid JSON and runtime execution time as well. So in essence, we've written a limited amount of code under the hood, which will allow pretty much any scenario because our data schema is JSON-driven, workflows are JSON-driven. They're all using kind of standard types of tasks, which are then configured according to the situation. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is a kind of draggable editor. We can do stuff. We can move things around. Kind of do that the old-fashioned way, absolutely. And for kind of a lot of users and power users, that's the way that you're going to want to use it. But we feel that particularly for more complicated technical workflows, having an AI which will be able to abstract a lot of complexity away from non-technical users is kind of really critical.
I can see the power of it, especially from one of the mottos I have is AI adoption, right? The adoption, the boundaries, the barrier, learning barrier. I understand. So effectively, I think you said at the beginning, most businesses have 10, 20 entities that generally they use, right? So what you have created is a vanilla layer to say these are the kind of things that organizations use.
Yeah.
And you are basically making it extensible. So if there are newer, I'm guessing it's extensible, right? People can extend upon it, suitable.
Yeah, so we have a completely custom data model. So with every business, you kind of start from scratch, going, okay, explain what your business is, how it works, and then build out the model from there. Obviously, there's some templates that we can pull on, particularly when it comes to the accounting, bookkeeping side of stuff. There's only so many ways you describe an invoice, for instance. So yeah, behind the scenes, we can have templates for a lot of the most common things, but ultimately it's kind of a completely blank slate. It's just that we've got very heavy AI guidance in here to allow people who would have no clue how to go in and set up a Postgres schema for their business to kind of slowly go through that process with AI to actually build up a really kind of powerful relationship database. Because again, this is what's missing, is that we talked very early on about how kind of 80% of the problems come to not having the data in the same place. But as soon as you do that and you understand the relationship between this marketing data, which would have been in HubSpot, with this lead data, which would have been on a Google Sheet, with these emails over here, which we're sending back and forth, then suddenly all of that stuff becomes actually really easy to interrogate and drill into and understand the patterns of and automate and all of those different kind of things, which make the data incredibly valuable to the business. I think you're muted there.
Sorry. I was saying thank you for sharing. Anything else we should talk about on this on the front end side of it?
I think what really sets us apart is that we are thinking about what happens in the future. Yeah, so we really see a world where all businesses are using a system like this, whether it's ours or someone else's. But what that means is that you have potentially hundreds of workflows running thousands of runs a day. Yeah. Now, what that then means is that for all your human in the loop tasks, like in this case, it's like, okay, this isn't standard. Someone needs to have a look at it to tell us what to do. You're going to have these kind of tasks stacking up. And like, there isn't really, from what I've seen, like an amazing way of dealing with that at the moment. So actually, although this is an AI first system, it's really built around human experience. And so if we kind of switch into work mode here and we kind of switch into our task inbox, there's two really important concepts around this. The first of all, anytime there's like a human task required in a workflow, or there's an exception to say, hey, something's gone wrong there, it's going to appear in one place. So it's like Gmail, but for all our tasks which we need to do within our business. So that's concept number one. Concept number two is that we can actually use dynamic UI to then show the person whatever they need to do and to give them the tools, whatever they need to do to actually resolve that. So for this demo, which we created for YC, which was their term sheet analyzer, well, what are the things that you would need to know if you actually wanted to complete that task? Well, I need to know and understand the basics of the context, what business for it for, what's the deal that we're talking about, and have a reference to our original term sheet if I want to go back and read in detail or check the details. But then what's the most important to me is like, well, why did this fail? What needs my attention? So what we've been able to do here is highlight, hey, look, these are the terms which were non-standard. This is what needs your attention. And then if we think back to the workflow where we said we had two options here, we could either approve it. And let me just show you that quickly. So we said we can either approve it or we can request a revision. And you clearly see if we request a revision that we're going to be sending an email using our Gmail connector, which is going to kind of send an email to someone requesting the revision. So if we switch back into work mode, we've got those options here. So we either approve that, and because we've got a durable orchestration behind the scenes, the workflow will continue wherever it was before with the state persisted and pick up at the next step. Or if we say, actually, we need to request a review here, we can click on that. We can even send the email directly from within the task window, and then we can hit send. And again, the workflow will continue from the stage that we were at before.
No, one of the biggest application, like the easiest applications I can see of this is, in roles, in legal, when you have any contract, new supplier, the first thing you hit is procurement and compliance, right? And like 3, 4, sometimes 5, 6 weeks are taken because people are too busy to look at that contract. So everyone has their own terms, right? You have a standard, every company has a standard terms and clauses. And new supply comes, usually manually they have to look through, okay, underline it, okay, you change it in a Word document, put a comment, it goes back and forth. But what I see here is that you have your rules of your contract, a supplier has signed a new contract, you match them together, you have those red line, green lines that you showed here. Okay, do I agree? Agree, don't agree. It's just clicks. So the whole point about augmenting human capability or productivity, right? Which translates into removing lost revenue, lost opportunities actually. Because any time like spent on contract negotiations for 3, 4 weeks is like you can just multiply how much probably you could have started the project 4 weeks ago or 5 weeks ago. These are lost costs in businesses, lost opportunities in businesses. Something like that in the legal space, in a compliance space, procurement space, huge, right?
Anything which is
Benefit.
very operationally heavy, you're absolutely right. Like just to kind of reinforce this point, this isn't something that we've kind of built out and made look really pretty. Yeah, the problem is solved because we have the data, which describes the data model and what data is related to it, because we built a workflow which tells us what's going on. Yeah, this is dynamically generated. So every single task, all you need to do is create a manual task, and the system will be able to infer, well, here's the information which they're going to need in order to do that. So no one sat here and built a React component. No one's even sat here with a drag and drop editor going, here's what we need to do. Again, it's because we've got all the information in one place. It actually makes it very easy for the AI to do very powerful things. And like coming back to your kind of legal example, what our pilot program on this was with a bookkeeping company. And I'm sure you can appreciate data processing is like a really heavy use of this because you have processes which can be automated, but then every now and again you hit like, oh, we don't have a match for this, or this is an outlier value, someone needs to have a look at it. And what we found was like by building out the workflows and by having this kind of task inbox to handle the exceptions and manual steps, we actually reduced the admin by 87%. And that allowed the bookkeeping firm to go from like 4 full-time employees offshore working on their data entry down to like half, 1 FTE just supervising. And at the same time, like 96%, I think, of those workflows were instant. So you go from, the bookkeeping being 3-4 days behind on average to like most transactions being reconciled in half an hour.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was reading before this podcast, like job categories. I mean, one of the topics I meant to chat with you about is what does it mean for general job categories that are out there? And I think what I came about was anything that is, and I think this is common knowledge, anyways. I guess. I mean, anything that is office or general administrative support, data entry, or customer service roles, right? They are very much probably are at risk. And this is where the opportunity for the individuals there are to adopt AI, learn AI, and really, I think, get over the fear factor. Because I've been on some conferences, and recently there was a CIO conference, and they keep talking about, oh yeah, but is AI forcing everyone to do certain things? They will lose their job. I guess the way I look at it is that, it is about acknowledging and, reinventing based on what the new capabilities this. I think someone has said those who use AI will survive. Those who do not use AI are at risk, right? To their advantages. So yeah, job roles probably will redefine. Everyone's job roles will redefine, but then that it is better to be part of the process to redefine what the future will be.
Yeah, and I think what's really meaningful about this is that like no one really enjoyed those admin jobs, right? No one enjoyed the data entry. So by freeing people up from that kind of busy work, actually it increases the value of the work that they're able to do. So now those people can spend their time actually talking to clients, supporting them, helping them understand their business, helping them plan their strategy moving forward and be kind of proactive in that respect, doing work that they enjoy rather than spending the whole day being reactive, doing these data entry jobs, that they didn't enjoy, that were relatively low value but needed to get done. So really what we've seen is that the more of the busy work that you can automate, the higher value tasks people are able to do, which is fantastic for the business as well. If your employees can spend more time on high value tasks, at the end of the day, you're going to generate more value and you're going to create more money.
And thinking a little bit more philosophically here, I guess, and also a bit more macro level, and what does it mean for the economy and basically general health of the world, right? I guess macroeconomic spending, it's human. I mean, we have heard about universal basic income as a theme that Elon Musk popularized a while ago, and some experiments have also gone about that. And the fact that the traditional way of working has been the industrial age, whereby 9 to 5, you go to office, you come back at 5 o'clock. And people have been geared, our education system has been geared to do that. But I guess lifestyle, what human beings are capable of, obviously surpasses beyond that constraint of where we are working. What could this mean? Like, if you can if an organization can do 10 people's worth of work with 2 people's worth of work, obviously they're saving money. I'm just wondering, how should that money be circulating through the economy? There are topics about taxation policies, there are topics about redistribution of that saving, because obviously there is an opportunity for those 8 people to do something else, to basically make contribution to the society. We talked about globalization versus localization, right? And all of that stuff. I personally feel that, there should be a mechanism in which that wealth is used to create a greater pie, right? And then obviously that means, I'm not saying about socialism here. I'm not talking about redistribution of the wealth. What I'm saying, I think there's an opportunity to rethink about how that wealth is redeployed, which is meaningful for the businesses, so they become more productive. Maybe less people need to work. I mean, someone told me this topic of singularity, where the cost of goods and services progressively go down to zero. And if we progress, if all friction points are removed, then people don't really need to work for a living, but they kind of live, which maybe the other way, but basically they live more, right? And they kind of, the creative side becomes more relevant. What are your thoughts? I've gone about for a while on this now.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to think that there's going to be a lot of short-term disruption while we kind of adjust to a new way of working, if you like. But I think humans are very much driven by other humans. That's a lot of our incentive and motivation in business and personal life, right? I don't think the value of humans is ever going to disappear in that respect. But obviously, it may need to be rebalanced a bit when we get to the point that AI can do most valuable economic tasks. I do think that there's probably an event horizon on this as well, beyond which it's almost impossible for us to see kind of what might happen. But certainly, I think if we boil it down to examples which are probably easiest to know and understand where we are right now, if we think about engineering, like coding programmers, for instance, then it feels to me like the economic empirical is there to focus on growth, not efficiency. And what I mean by that is if you have a business and it has 10 developers, yeah, and because of AI tools, they're starting to be a lot more productive and have a lot more output. I've never seen a backlog get down to zero. I don't know about you, but it just doesn't happen because it's like pulling on a piece of string. Every time you do one thing, another 5 ideas pop out of it. Well, wouldn't it be amazing if we could do this? Wouldn't it be amazing to do that? Right? So yes, let's say 5 times the efficiency overnight, right? The business has 2 options, right? It can fire 8 people and save a little bit of money, yeah, or it can vastly improve its product, vastly improve the number of customers that it can serve, and it can improve the amount of revenue and profit that it generates by an order of magnitude, right? Now, for me, it seems fairly obvious that capitalism leads towards the latter. And so hopefully that's an encouraging viewpoint because companies are incentivized for growth, not efficiency in that respect. And therefore, I think as we become more capable of doing more, then people will want more.
Yeah, let's hope for. I think as both of us are saying, I guess this is an interesting period, and I think sooner. I think it's imperative that everyone acknowledges it, moves away from any kind of denial mindset. But it's not about starting from the bottom. But I think sometimes it is better to try and learn, not assume that. I think this is a general tendency to like people have worked for X number of years, so they have to be definitely better than the others. But I think it's time to get rid of that mentality. It's like it's a level playing field, right? We are all at the same level. Pick up an area that really you're passionate about, you're interested in, build your capabilities, learn by doing. Everyone needs to be self-capable of creating something. So creators and builders, right? Not necessarily, coordination is a good skill, but I think coordination, which had a huge demand over the last 15 years in terms of program managers, project directors, they're important roles, right? But I think this tool has empowered everyone to be a lot more, to be actually creators in their own rights, So I think that's the opportunity. Anyways, we may have gone off a little bit off tangent, but it's been fascinating speaking to you, Chris. Anything you have
Absolutely.
to call out or ask me at this point in time?
I think just it's a very exciting time, right? We could probably spend another hour talking about OpenAI Codex and how that works, but that's probably that's probably one for another time. But I mean, again, I think the key takeaway from it is that we get new tools, we get new capabilities, but when you focus on what you're working on, how you create value, and what your workflows are, then they just become kind of exciting additions. You don't need to completely change the way that you're working. You can just integrate them neatly into how you're doing things and have a quick acceleration in terms of what you're doing. I think that, as a developer now, you should be spending a significant chunk of your time thinking about your optimal workflows and optimizing the processes and tools which you use, because actually the benefits from that and the kind of return you get from that investment are just incredibly high.
Lovely. Chris, thank you for your time. And I guess one
Thank
final
you.
comment for anyone listening to us still, when we upload, obviously, is Agentics Foundation is a nonprofit which is dedicated to democratizing and enabling and everyone to adopt it suitably. It has brought a diverse set of individuals. Chris and I got to know each other through that forum as well. And I guess we thoroughly encourage anyone join us. I think every session spent with basically we have live coder sessions on Thursdays at 5 p.m. UK time and hacker spaces on Fridays, same time. Every session is everyone. I mean, at least I learn something extra every session I go. So it's open for all. So agentics.org, that's the website. So on that note, so this is Chris Polter here and Mongrel Chakravarti here. Feel free to reach us on LinkedIn. But thank you. Speak to you again, Chris. Thank you for your time. Take care.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye.